Hi, how are you today? So in this video, I'm going to take a look back at something that many of us remember very well. Certainly if you grew up in the 70s and the 80s and even into the 90s, many of you remember Columbia House. Yes, of course, Columbia House. Who can forget? Who can forget seeing those advertisements in magazines or those flyers that would come in the mail where you would have this graphic of all these different albums that you could order, and it was usually you could order 10 of them for a penny, and it was such a fantastic deal. And certainly many people joined Columbia House, and it was certainly very appealing, this idea of getting 10 CDs or tapes for 1 penny. It was just irresistible, and for that reason Columbia House flourished for many decades. And I myself was definitely a member of Columbia House, and I'm just going to share some of my memories of this great thing, this very retro thing, Columbia House. Now, again, as I mentioned, it certainly, as far back as I can remember, it was quite popular in the 70s and the 80s and also into the 1990s. And again, the appeal of it was that you could order 10 albums for a penny. Now, the thing about that is, of course, it was 1 cent for the 10 selections, but you also had to pay shipping on top of that. Now, I recall that the shipping cost at that time was really not that much. It might have been, I think, around $5. So you were actually paying about 1 cent plus $5 for shipping, which was still very affordable. And as I mentioned, in the 70s, I think their main format was vinyl and 8-tracks, and then eventually cassettes became the sort of standard medium. And then as the 90s came on, CDs became more and more popular. Now, I've read a lot of articles about Columbia House and how they made money. Many people often wonder, well, if they were selling 10 selections for a penny, how in the world did they make money? Well, they made money, and they made a lot of it. And from what I've read, a lot of their sort of profit came from their selection of the month. And I'm sure any of you who has been involved with Columbia House in the past remember this. They would select one album as sort of the pick of the month or the selection of the month. And you had a card, and if you didn't want that selection of the month, you had to indicate on the card and mail it back to them. And you had to do this by a certain deadline. And if they didn't get the card by the deadline, they would just automatically send you the album and charge you for it. And as I recall, the price for that selection of the month was not cheap. It was usually above what you would pay at your local record store. And so you had to be very diligent and very much careful about this, because again, if you didn't send that card back in time, they would just automatically send the selection to you and charge you for it. Now, I remember I was pretty diligent about this. I was pretty cautious about sending back the card in time. So I don't think I ever really got dinged for it. And I will mention, in all my years being a member of Columbia House, I think I may have accepted the selection of the month once. Usually their selection of the month was something very pop and very sort of a big seller. And at that time, I really wasn't into a lot of the popular music. I tend to pick a lot of the more obscure alternative kind of selections. So again, I think I only took the selection of the month maybe once. And again, I was pretty careful about sending back the card in time, indicating to them that I didn't want it. Now, I have heard all kinds of horror stories from people who didn't pay their bill, and eventually, if you just let it go and you didn't pay, eventually the collection agencies would start coming after you. And I've heard many horror stories about collection agencies calling people and harassing them to pay their bill to Columbia House. And another thing I recently learned, and I understand that Columbia House actually didn't pay any royalties at all to the artists whose albums they were selling. And that kind of blows my mind in one sense. But then again, really things haven't changed all that much, because if you think of popular streaming sites, you have to have thousands and thousands of streams before you can even get $1. So really, have things changed all that much? I would argue they really haven't. But anyway, I it was quite a surprise to me to recently learn that they simply did not pay royalties to the artists whose albums they were selling. Now, I'll also mention there was another music club, the BMG Music Club. They came around more in the 90s, and I also joined that club as well. And it was a similar deal. You would get a flyer and you would look through and pick your 10 CDs. And again, it was, I think, 10 for a penny, and they would arrive in the mail. So again, I remember the BMG Music Club being very, very similar to Columbia House. And I remember it was always so much fun and such a big deal to get that little flyer with all the tapes listed, and you would take a pen and circle the ones that you wanted. I always really, really enjoyed that a lot. It was a lot of part of the fun of the whole process. Now, from what I understand, there were also many people who scammed Columbia House. I guess it was quite common to, some people would set up many, many different fake addresses, and they would create these fake identities, and they would do the deal multiple times, where they would send in a penny, get the 10 albums, and get them sent to multiple addresses, and they would scam Columbia House like this. And I recently heard about some guy who did this like 100 times or more than 100 times, and he would basically take the CDs and then turn around and sell them at local flea markets and that sort of thing. And I guess this was quite common. And maybe this might have been a reason why Columbia House eventually died out. I'm sure there were many reasons why. In terms of the quality of Columbia House records and tapes and CDs, I remember them being on par with the same recordings that you would buy in a record store. Again, the sound quality was just as good. I wouldn't say it was better or worse, but I would say it was just as good as what you would find in your local record store. I also remember one time in the 90s, and maybe some of you remember this too, there was a flyer sent out and they had a huge LP sale. I think maybe they were just trying to clear out a lot of the old vinyl that was sitting around. And I remember they were selling all these vinyl really, really cheap. I think it might have been $1 each. And I remember ordering a bunch of brand new sealed vinyl for like $1 each. Again, this was the 90s, and at that time, vinyl was kind of uncool and unpopular, so they were probably just trying to get rid of these records that were just sitting around. But anyway, those are my principal recollections of Columbia House. I'd love to hear your memories. What did you think of Columbia House? Did you like it? Were you not a fan? Did you have collection agencies come after you? Please feel free to share your experiences. Please feel free to leave a comment, give us a thumbs up, and as always, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. It would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next time. Take care. Bye-bye.